I never thought one small choice could completely change the way my family looked at me. It started on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind of day where the air feels heavy and still, and nothing seems important until suddenly, everything becomes urgent. My sister had left her room door slightly ajar, just like she always did when she was gone, and there it was, hanging on her chair, a soft, pale pink dress that seemed almost to glow in the dim sunlight. I didn't know why I was drawn to it. Maybe it was the fabric, silky and smooth under my fingers, or maybe it was the curiosity that had been growing inside me for years, a small, quiet longing that I had never dared to acknowledge. I remember holding it, feeling the weight of it in my hands, and hearing my own heartbeat in my ears. Nobody was home, my parents had gone to visit relatives, my sister was at a friend's house, and in that perfect, silent bubble of time, I made a choice that I would never be able to undo. I tried it on, slipping my arms into the delicate sleeves, feeling the dress hug my shoulders and then fall gracefully around my waist. I stared at myself in the mirror, at the reflection that was me, yet not entirely me. There was a new shape to my body, a strange elegance I had never seen before, and I couldn't stop looking, couldn't stop smiling at the person staring back. It was intoxicating, the way it felt to see myself in her clothes. I had imagined this moment countless times in secret, but reality was so much more intense. I twirled, almost forgetting that anyone could see me, and for the first time, I felt a kind of freedom that I didn't even know I was missing. Then, just as quickly, a panic set in. What if someone found out? What if my parents saw me like this? My stomach tightened, my mind racing. But something inside me refused to stop. For the first time, I realized that this was not just a dress, it was a version of myself I had been hiding, a part of me I had buried under years of fear and expectation. When my parents returned home, the change in me was subtle but undeniable. I tried to act normal, hoping they wouldn't notice the faint scent of her perfume that clung to my skin, or the way my movements had shifted, more cautious, yet somehow graceful. But parents have a way of sensing things, and soon enough, my mother's eyes narrowed. "You've been in your sister's room," she said, voice flat but heavy with meaning. My heart sank, and my attempt at casual denial was weak. I just went in to grab something," I muttered, and she didn't even respond, the silence more accusing than words. It didn't take long for the confrontation to happen. My father's face was stern, disappointment radiating from him in a way I had never felt before. He didn't yell, he didn't need to, the silence said it all. "We trusted you," he said, each word cutting deeper than any slap or shout could. I wanted to explain, to tell them that this wasn't about defiance, that I wasn't trying to hurt them, but the words got stuck, tangled with guilt and shame. They didn't understand, and I couldn't make them. That night, I lay in bed feeling a strange mix of exhilaration and despair, knowing that I had discovered something essential about myself but at the cost of the love I had always relied on. The days that followed were worse. My parents avoided me in ways that were almost unbearable. Conversations were clipped, smiles forced, and the warmth of our home felt cold. My sister, who had once been my closest ally, now watched me with wary eyes, unsure whether to laugh, scold, or feel pity. Every glance, every whisper, reminded me that I had crossed a boundary that could never be uncrossed. I tried to retreat into my own world, hiding the dress away, but the urge didn't go away. I found myself drawn to it, to the sensation of wearing it, to the reflection that made me feel like myself in a way nothing else could. It wasn't just about the dress anymore. It was about courage, about stepping into a truth that I had always sensed but never allowed myself to explore. Every day, I wrestled with the fear of judgment and the need to be authentic. My parents' disapproval weighed heavily, but it was becoming clear that their opinion could no longer dictate my choices. There were moments of quiet defiance, like brushing my hair in the mirror in a certain way, adjusting the collar of a blouse, imagining the life I could live if I dared. And in those moments, I felt alive. The tension in the house grew unbearable. Meals were eaten in silence, my presence almost ignored, and the unspoken question of why hung over every interaction. I began to notice the subtle shifts in my own behavior, how I carried myself, the way I moved, the way I spoke. I realized that the transformation wasn't just on the outside. Wearing that dress, exploring that side of myself, had changed me fundamentally. I was discovering resilience, a quiet strength, a sense of identity that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. Weeks turned into months, and my parents' coldness never fully thawed. Family gatherings were strained, questions were probing, and every attempt to bridge the gap felt like walking on ice. I tried to explain, to share pieces of my experience, but the words felt hollow, inadequate against the weight of their expectations. It was in those moments of isolation that I learned to rely on myself, to find comfort in small acts of authenticity, to accept that love could be conditional but self-respect could not. I started experimenting in small, private ways, wearing her clothes when I was alone, adjusting my appearance subtly, learning about makeup, about styling, about the way presentation could alter not just how others saw me, but how I felt about myself. Each experiment was a step further into a world that my parents couldn't accept, a world that was mine to explore. I began to journal, recording the sensations, the emotions, the conflicts and triumphs, creating a private archive of my transformation. It was both a rebellion and a revelation, painful and exhilarating at the same time. One evening, my parents discovered one of my journals. I was terrified, expecting anger, shouting, maybe even punishment. Instead, my father simply shook his head, and my mother's eyes were heavy with sorrow. "Why can't you be happy the way you are?" my father asked quietly, and I realized that no amount of explanation could fix the rupture. Their disappointment wasn't just about the dress, it was about fear, about a world they didn't understand, about their inability to accept someone so different from the image they had imagined. That was the moment I truly understood the permanence of what I had done. I had crossed a line, discovered a part of myself, and nothing would ever be the same. Yet, even in that silence, I felt a strange liberation. I had lost their approval, yes, but I had found myself. And in a way, that was more important. I learned to embrace the reflection in the mirror, to own the feelings that had terrified me, to accept the complexity of my identity. I knew I would face challenges, judgment, and misunderstanding, but I also knew that living authentically was worth every pang of loss. I realized that transformation is never about others, it is about daring to see yourself honestly, even when the world refuses to see you in the same way. Years later, I can still remember the feel of that first dress against my skin, the mixture of fear and exhilaration, the thrill of discovering a self that had been hidden for so long. My relationship with my parents remains complicated, often distant, sometimes painful, but I have learned to carry my truth without their validation. I have friends who accept me fully, a reflection that no longer feels like a secret, and a confidence that no criticism can shatter. That single choice, that one moment of curiosity and courage, set the course of my life. I lost their approval forever, yes, but I gained something infinitely more powerful, the knowledge that I belong to myself. I wear that memory like a badge, a reminder that identity is not given, it is claimed, and that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it and still move forward. And though my parents may never fully understand, I am no longer afraid of their judgment, because I have learned that the person staring back at me in the mirror is enough. I am enough. That dress was just the beginning, a symbol of everything I had been too scared to admit, and from that moment on, I knew that my life would never follow the path they had laid out, but it would be mine, entirely and unapologetically mine. Every time I reflect on that day, I remember the mixture of guilt, thrill, and awakening that surged through me. It was a moment that destroyed illusions and built foundations, a moment of fear that became liberation, a moment when I truly began to understand who I am. And though I lost approval, I gained authenticity, and in the end, authenticity matters more than approval. It is the only thing that endures when every other support falls away. That first dress, soft and pink, is long gone now, but the feeling it awakened is still with me. Every time I face the world as my true self, I remember the courage it took to slip into it, the vulnerability of that first step, and the irreversible choice that defined me. Losing my parents' approval was a painful, heartbreaking reality, but discovering who I truly am was a gift beyond measure. I would never undo that choice, because it taught me a lesson I could never have learned any other way, that to honor yourself is to live freely, even if the cost is everything else. And so, I walk forward, carrying both the weight of loss and the lightness of self-discovery, knowing that one dress changed everything, not because it was fabric and thread, but because it dared me to become the person I had always been waiting to meet, myself. Even months after that first dress, the tension in my house had not lessened. Every morning, waking up felt like stepping onto a stage I had not rehearsed for. My parents' glances were still cautious, laden with the silent question of whether I would behave normally, and I was painfully aware of every step I took. I could feel the old boundaries they had imposed on me, walls built from years of expectations, walls I had begun to challenge with small acts of quiet defiance. I remember one afternoon vividly. My mother had left a basket of laundry on the couch, the smell of freshly washed clothes mingling with the faint scent of the pink dress I still secretly kept hidden. I couldn't resist. Curiosity and longing were stronger than reason. I pulled out one of her softer blouses, running my fingers over the fabric as if it were a secret treasure. I slipped it on and caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. My heart raced. I wasn't sure whether to be terrified or exhilarated. There was a thrill in seeing myself like this, a sensation that was both freeing and dangerous. I had never imagined that something so simple could become a form of rebellion, yet it had. Each time I wore a piece of her clothing, even when I was alone, it was a way to reclaim a small piece of myself, a quiet declaration that my identity could not be contained by their judgment. But with this freedom came guilt. I could see the disappointment I had caused in their eyes, the subtle changes in their tone, the way my father's voice carried that restrained frustration whenever I spoke. It was suffocating at times, but it also made me stronger, more aware of who I was and what I could no longer deny. The turning point came one evening when my parents unexpectedly returned early from a relative's home. I was in my room, experimenting with a skirt and a light blouse, trying to adjust the fit, trying to imagine myself as someone who could exist fully in this identity. When my father opened the door, the air seemed to crack. I froze, the blouse half adjusted, my reflection in the mirror revealing the truth I had tried to keep hidden. My mother appeared behind him, and suddenly the room felt smaller, suffocating, the weight of their silent judgment pressing down on me like a physical force. "What are you doing?" my mother asked, her voice trembling between confusion, fear, and anger. My father's expression was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp, piercing straight through me. I wanted to explain, to tell them that this was who I truly was, that it wasn't just a phase, that it wasn't rebellion, it was identity, but the words lodged in my throat. I could only nod slightly, a silent acknowledgement of what they already knew. They didn't shout. They didn't slam doors. Their silence was worse, a quiet condemnation that left me feeling smaller than I had ever felt before. My mother turned away, retreating to the kitchen, leaving my father behind. "We can't understand this," he said quietly, almost to himself, but I heard it clearly. "We raised you to be one way, and now," his voice trailed off. I wanted to tell him that people aren't always who we expect them to be, that identity can't be molded to fit our fears, but I remained silent. I understood, painfully, that some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. The days that followed were a mix of sorrow, secrecy, and defiance. I moved carefully around the house, aware of their scrutiny, but I no longer felt shame for what I was discovering. I started documenting everything in a journal, pouring my heart onto the pages, the excitement, the fear, the longing, the guilt, and the small victories of personal expression. Writing became a refuge, a way to process the isolation that had grown since the first dress. Eventually, I began to venture outside, testing boundaries slowly. I experimented with subtle choices in clothing, with hairstyles, with accessories, always careful, always private. The world outside my home was vast, and unlike my parents, people did not immediately judge me based on their expectations. I discovered pockets of acceptance, small communities online and in real life where people encouraged authenticity and self-expression. For the first time, I realized that my identity could exist beyond the constraints of my family's disapproval. Yet, the shadow of home always lingered. Dinner times became exercises in restraint, conversations were clipped, smiles were forced. Sometimes I caught my mother staring at me, her eyes betraying a complex mixture of fear, sadness, and perhaps a flicker of understanding she could not articulate. My father rarely looked directly at me, his disappointment as heavy as the walls of our house. It was lonely, but in that loneliness, I discovered resilience. I learned that the heart can carry grief and joy at the same time, that identity and family expectation can clash, without one negating the other. Months passed, and the rhythm of my secret life became routine. I learned to savor private moments of self-expression, to build confidence quietly, to find joy in small victories. I found friends who accepted me wholly, who encouraged me to explore this side of myself without shame. And yet, the pull of my family's disapproval remained, a constant reminder that authenticity often comes at a price. One day, my mother left a note on my bed, simple and brief. "We don't understand, but we want you to be safe. Come to dinner." It was not forgiveness, not acceptance, but it was something a crack in the wall of disappointment. I felt hope, fragile and tentative, that perhaps over time, our relationship could find a new shape, a new understanding, even if full approval was never possible. I realized then that transformation is not a single moment, but a journey. The dress, the blouses, the skirts, they were symbols of a truth I had discovered, but the real transformation was internal, a shift in how I perceived myself and how I allowed the world to perceive me. I was no longer living solely to meet expectations, I was living to honor my own truth. And while my parents may never fully accept it, I had claimed a freedom that no judgment could take away. Looking back, I see that first dress not just as clothing, but as a portal into self-discovery. It forced me to confront fear, shame, and guilt, but it also unveiled courage, resilience, and the power of self-acceptance. Losing my parents' approval was painful, yes, but it was also the catalyst for a life more authentic than I could have imagined. Every step since that day has been a negotiation between fear and truth, between love and judgment, but I have learned that identity cannot be silenced by disapproval. I am still learning, still evolving, still navigating the complexities of family, society, and self. But I have discovered a profound truth: authenticity is worth every risk, every heartbreak, every quiet dinner of strained conversation. That dress changed everything, not because it was fabric, but because it forced me to confront myself. And in confronting myself, I found the courage to live honestly, even when love is conditional, even when approval is withheld, even when the world or the people closest to me cannot understand. The path is not easy, and the loss is real, but the self I have discovered is irreplaceable. I can no longer live in fear of judgment, and I cannot erase the transformation that dress sparked. It was the first step in a lifelong journey of embracing who I am, unapologetically, fully, and bravely. And though my parents' approval may never return, I have found something stronger: the unwavering certainty that I am enough, just as I am, and that living my truth is the only way to honor the person I have become. Life after that note from my mother became a delicate balancing act. The silence in the house had lessened slightly, but tension still lingered in every corner. I approached each interaction with caution, careful not to provoke anger, yet unwilling to deny the self I had discovered. I could feel the invisible line between them and me, a line I had crossed once and could never retreat from, and I understood that this was not just about a dress or clothing, it was about identity, authenticity, and the invisible chains that had bound me for years. I started leaving small hints of my exploration in plain sight: a blouse folded neatly on my chair, a hairpin left on the dresser, a faint trace of perfume in the bathroom. My mother noticed, I could see it in her eyes, a flicker of recognition mixed with unease. She didn't confront me directly, but there was a quiet tension that seemed to hum in the air, as if the house itself were holding its breath. My father, however, remained steadfast, his distance unwavering, his disappointment a silent wall I could not breach. One evening, the quiet escalated into confrontation. I had been brushing my hair in front of the mirror, a simple ritual that had become almost meditative, when my father entered the room without knocking. His face was taut, his eyes sharp. "I can't keep watching this," he said quietly, almost controlled anger in his tone. "This isn't you. This isn't the person we raised." I felt a mix of fear and determination swell inside me. I wanted to tell him the truth, to explain that this wasn't about rebellion, that it was about finally acknowledging who I had always been, but words felt fragile against the weight of his judgment. "I know it's hard for you to understand," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I didn't choose this to hurt you. I chose it because it's the only way I've ever felt like myself. I can't pretend anymore. I can't unsee who I am." His gaze softened for just a moment, as if he were trying to reconcile the image of the child he knew with the person standing before him. But the softness didn't last. "We wanted a different life for you," he said, voice breaking slightly. This isn't what we envisioned. I don't know if I ever can accept it." The words hit me harder than any argument could. I felt the sting of loss, the grief of knowing that some bridges may never be rebuilt. Yet, within that grief, a strange resolve formed. I realized that my path could not be dictated by fear of judgment or hope for approval. I had tasted the freedom of authenticity, felt the exhilaration of being myself even in secrecy, and I could not turn back. I looked at him steadily. "I am still your child," I said quietly. "I am still the person you raised. I am just, also this. And I need you to see me as all of me, not just the parts you can understand." That night, the house was heavy with unspoken emotions. My parents retired to their rooms, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I felt a mixture of sorrow, guilt, and a strange sense of liberation. I realized that loss and discovery often travel together. In claiming my truth, I had also claimed a separation from the life I had imagined would be easy. But for the first time, I felt a profound sense of clarity. I could not live for their approval, but I could live honestly, fully, bravely. In the days that followed, I began to explore more boldly. I experimented with clothing, with hairstyles, with the subtle art of presentation that allowed me to exist more fully in the world as myself. I found solace in private moments, in mirrors and journals, and gradually, in small interactions with friends and communities who accepted me without question. The world beyond my home became a sanctuary, a place where I could test boundaries and build confidence, while still navigating the delicate tension at home. My parents remained cautious. My mother would sometimes linger near my room, peeking curiously but not confronting, and my father continued to maintain his distance, his disapproval like a shadow that followed me through every room. Yet, I noticed subtle shifts, tiny glimmers of recognition, a softness in her voice when she thought I wasn't listening, a faint attempt at engagement from him, perhaps out of love, perhaps out of an inability to fully express his own conflicted feelings. It became clear that my journey was not only about self-discovery but also about patience, about learning to exist fully without forcing understanding, about holding space for both love and conflict to coexist. I realized that transformation is not a single moment, but a continuous process, and that courage often looks like quiet resilience, like living truthfully even when the people closest to you cannot yet comprehend it. One particularly poignant evening, I sat on my bed, holding the skirt that had begun this journey. I traced the fabric with my fingers, thinking of the person I had been and the person I was becoming. My reflection in the mirror looked back at me with a confidence I had never known, a sense of self-possession that felt both fragile and unshakable. I realized then that this journey was about more than clothing or appearances. It was about claiming my own life, my own identity, and refusing to be diminished by misunderstanding or disapproval. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, I built a life that honored my truth while navigating the complexities of family expectations. I became adept at balancing visibility and privacy, daring expression and careful discretion. I found joy in small victories, in quiet moments of self-expression, in the subtle but powerful act of existing fully as myself. And though my parents' approval remained elusive, I discovered something far more enduring: self-respect, authenticity, and the courage to continue growing despite opposition. Looking back, I see that first moment with the dress as the spark of a lifelong journey. It was a decision that carried both consequence and liberation, a moment of vulnerability that forced me to confront fear and embrace truth. Losing my parents' approval was painful, but it revealed the depths of my resilience, the strength of my convictions, and the beauty of discovering who I truly am. And so, I continue forward, carrying the memory of that first dress not as a symbol of shame, but as a beacon of courage. Every step I take, every choice I make in authenticity, is a testament to the journey that began in secrecy and curiosity, a journey that taught me that while love and approval may be conditional, the truth of oneself is inviolable. I have learned that living honestly, even in the face of disapproval, is the greatest gift I can give myself, and that the person I see in the mirror, unapologetically real, is the only reflection that truly matters. Time had a strange way of stretching and contracting after that. Years passed, But the memory of that first dress, the thrill, the fear, and the irreversible choice, remained as vivid as the day it happened. By now, I had learned to navigate life with a sense of certainty that I had never known as a child. I had built a world for myself where my identity could breathe, where authenticity was not an act of rebellion but a declaration of existence. Yet, the lingering tension at home was never fully gone. My parents remained distant, careful, and cautious, their approval never fully returned, but there were subtle signs, moments of recognition, that suggested they were beginning, slowly, to see me, if not fully understand me. It was during one quiet evening, sitting alone in my room surrounded by memories and reflections, that I finally realized how much I had grown. I looked around at the collection of clothes, journals, and photographs, small tokens of my journey, of my self-expression, and I felt a profound sense of peace. The person I had been, the person I had hidden, and the person I had fought to become were all present in the room with me. It struck me then that the real transformation had never been about the dress itself, or even the clothing. It had been about embracing a truth I had long denied, about discovering courage and resilience in the face of judgment, about choosing authenticity even when it carried the cost of love or approval. My parents, of course, never fully articulated their feelings. My father remained reserved, his love quiet and complicated, his disappointment lingering like a shadow at the edges of our interactions. My mother's eyes sometimes softened when she caught me in moments of personal expression, a silent acknowledgement of the person I had become. There were dinners where conversation flowed more naturally, though always cautiously, and family gatherings where I could sense a tentative tolerance, a fragile bridge between my reality and theirs. I understood that some bridges might never fully reconnect, but even the smallest cracks of understanding were meaningful. As I moved further into adulthood, I began to see the wider world and the acceptance it could offer. I made friends who celebrated my identity, mentors who encouraged my growth, and communities that allowed me to thrive without fear of judgment. For the first time, I realized that family, while important, is only one part of the support system that sustains us. The freedom to express myself, to live openly and truthfully, became the cornerstone of my life. And with that freedom came confidence, self-respect, and an unwavering commitment to the person I had discovered in that first stolen moment with my sister's dress. Yet, even with all the acceptance outside, I never forgot the house I grew up in, the parents who struggled to understand me, and the first time I had dared to step into a version of myself that felt impossible to reconcile with their expectations. That memory was a touchstone, a reminder of the courage it took to confront fear, to face judgment, and to embrace my identity fully. The dress, long since put away or repurposed, symbolized more than fabric. It symbolized awakening, resilience, and the beginning of a life lived on my own terms. I came to understand that loss and discovery are intertwined. I had lost the approval of the people I had loved most, but in doing so, I gained something infinitely more valuable, the ability to exist honestly, fully, and unapologetically. The grief of that loss was real and enduring, yet it became part of a larger tapestry of self-realization, courage, and growth. I could honor that grief without letting it define me, and in that balance, I found freedom. By now, the reflection in the mirror was familiar and comforting. I saw a person who had faced fear, who had dared to explore identity in its truest form, and who had emerged stronger, braver, and more resilient than ever before. I saw the complexity of human emotion, the collision of love, disappointment, and understanding, and I learned that relationships are rarely simple. The person staring back at me was enough. I had learned to cherish that reflection, to respect it, and to protect it from the conditional judgments of others. And so, I live in a world shaped by choice, courage, and self-discovery. The path has been lonely at times, difficult at times, but it has also been rich with meaning, depth, and revelation. I learned to navigate disapproval, to thrive in authenticity, and to embrace identity without compromise. My parents' approval may remain forever out of reach, but their absence of understanding no longer diminishes me. I have discovered a freedom that cannot be taken away, a sense of self that no judgment can shake, and a life that I have claimed for myself entirely. I wear my memories, my experiences, my identity like armor and banner alike. Every reflection, every garment, every choice is a declaration that I am here, I exist fully, and I will continue to evolve without apology. That first dress taught me more than I could ever articulate. It taught me courage, resilience, and the power of truth. Losing my parents' approval was a heartbreak that will always linger, but it was also the catalyst for a life I could finally call my own. I step into each day with the quiet certainty that authenticity is worth every sacrifice, every pang of grief, and every moment of doubt. I have learned to honor myself, to embrace my journey, and to live openly, even when those closest to me cannot. That dress was the beginning, a first step into a life fully claimed, and every choice I make since then has been an echo of that moment. I have lost approval, yes, but I have gained identity, and identity, I now know, is everything. And as I look in the mirror, older, wiser, and still learning, I finally understand the truth that has been with me since that first day. To be yourself is to live bravely, and to live bravely is to discover a freedom no one can ever take away. I am myself, unapologetically, fully, and irrevocably, and no loss can ever erase that.